We're
right,
on.
We're actually recording now. Today's what, the 9th? The Gregorian 9th. It's the Gregorian 9th day of 2021. Just for a sort of a heads up, I guess.
All right. Well, good morning.
Good morning. Oh, by the way, before I forget, I just want to, the word when you and I were talking the other day, the word I couldn't think of for some reason was resonance.
Resonance, yes.
Resonance.
Mm-hmm.
Resonance. Where it's beyond harmony. It's beyond harmony. Resonance is beyond harmony. If you know where I'm going with that.
Yes. It's a good word.
Probably, I think it's the best word because I've always said that the truth or the heart is the truth detector, but it detects truth through resonance.
Yeah.
And that's
I like that word.
Yeah, it's my favorite word actually, resonance, because that's where you could actually physically feel the vibrational nonsense or feel the vibrational untruth because it doesn't resonate.
Well, I like one that may piggyback on that well, and that's relevance. I don't think what we experience or the words that we use or the concepts have much relevance most times, where I think you and I have dug into that through the years, where there's so much distraction going on that there's some fairly deep conversations that I've listened to, not so much participated in other than maybe with you. Very little relevance, though. So do you actually get anywhere, or do in this case, people I'm listening to get anywhere with anything? And it's like, I don't see it. And if there isn't some kind of relevance to it, I know you and I got all over the place the other day, which is typical, coming from all angles, and it just kind of expands, and it's like finding the pieces on a puzzle as we're sitting there across the table from each other. We've got the basic outline, and then as we talk, we're each putting a piece in, and you don't know where you're going to find it. You don't know if you're going to go for the blue sky or the part of the ship that's in the picture or whatever it is. It just starts to kind of magically unfold, and I think that's the story of you and I, much as any. I like that. I think you said Debbie is the one that come up with a new word order, and I want to just throw something out that came up shortly after talking to you, and something I listened to, and then I'm going to shut up and let you have the floor. I'll probably get the numbers here wrong, but in this video that I listened to, they were talking about William Shakespeare, and he had access to, I want to say it was 540 word vocabulary. How anybody knows that, I don't know, but obviously pretty gifted if we can attribute anything that he's supposed to have participated in, writing and so forth, where we know there's such a void there, especially now that I even struggle, and you're very well spoken, but we're very limited, on how we've used our mind and especially our language. And I think that's a good place to kind of start with this, a new word order. I think that video said something like the average individual now uses maybe 40 words or something in comparison to William Shakespeare. And I know I struggle with, I've said it to you kind of tongue-in-cheek, I don't have the adjectives to describe anything. Even when I'm talking to you, I just through the course of talking to you, there will be more access to more words that I've read or used or something like that. And for me, a lot of this has to do with, if you control the language, you control everyone, especially if you're telling them such and such a word means this, and you program them early on with that's what that means, and that's not how you use the word, in other words. So I'm going to shut up now and see where you can go with things.
First of all, you lit about 10 fires under me with that. Average individual. I mean, you were talking about, you used the terms or the words average individual. First of all, average. 100 different people. You put 100 different people into a pool, and then you divide it up to come to an average. I don't know if you consider yourself average. I do not. I'm not average at any level. Individual is another thing. Is that when I am 100% of myself, I'm whole. And as a whole, there's no individual piece missing from me. So as a whole, WHOLE, I am complete. And so there's no individual piece of me that is missing that could be considered biblically the lost lamb, the lost sheep, the lost coin. So there's no piece or part of me that is missing. And as such, there's no individual piece of me that is separate from me. So as an individual, you got to be very careful, because if you claim to be an individual as a whole man, you are not, but as a part of another whole, a society, a public pool, that kind of thing, you could be considered an individual. I do not consider myself an individual because I'm complete. So there's no part of me that's missing. I don't like that word. So again, average individual is damaging in most cases, and I'm going to say that out loud. Your metaphor on the puzzles, the puzzle, working on the puzzle on the tabletop, I love that, because if you and I are working on the same puzzle, then there's a chance we're going to find I mean, every piece on the table will be to that puzzle. So we have a singular puzzle that we're working on, and all the pieces are there. We just have to put them together. The world we live in isn't that simple. We're stuck with about 1,000 different narratives, which means 1,000 different puzzles, which mean all of the pieces are on the table. And not only do we have to put puzzle pieces together, we have to put proper puzzles together. In other words, all these different narratives are their own puzzle. We have to separate out the narratives to get to reality. I prefer to actually put the reality puzzle together. I don't care about all the false narratives. So again, the first job is to separate all the narrative pieces, get those off the table, and then start putting together the reality puzzle, which isn't so difficult when you get rid of all of your erroneous belief systems. It's pretty easy. I remember seeing this. I'm trying to think of who actually did this. It was one of the motivational guys from the past, but he gave an example of a puzzle. And a little boy was working on a puzzle, a very difficult puzzle, a puzzle of the world, and he was doing it on a glass top table. And an older gentleman came in and says, "That looks pretty difficult." And he left the room for a little bit, but when he came back, the little boy had finished the puzzle, to his amazement. And what's interesting is the guy says, "Well, how did you do it so quickly?" And the boy said, "Well, on the other side, I mean, each puzzle piece on the other side of the piece was another puzzle. I discovered that on the other side of the piece, there was a picture of a man. So all I did was I just put the man together, and the world came together on the other side."
Nice.
So
nice.
It was easier to put the man together than it was to put this incredibly difficult puzzle of the world together. So again, all he did is he recognized the other side of the piece, and he worked on that side, and when he completed that side, this side was complete as well. I get excited about this stuff, as you can tell. And
if I can
I will tear
piggyback
apart
on that.
every word. Yeah, do it.
Well, two things came up for me as you were using that metaphor. I started with whether it was a good one or a bad one. We'll find out in the end, I suppose. But Sir Ken Robinson had one of the top TED Talks of all time. And I can't remember the exact title, but he was an educator that said, I think it's like schools kill creativity or something like this. And he tells some funny stories throughout it. And one of the stories is these kids that are in second grade or something get an assignment to draw a picture of anything they want. And so the teacher's going around the room watching these little ones, scribble on a piece of paper with their crayons and whatnot. And she comes across this little girl, and she's drawing away, and the teacher can't make out what it is or whatever. And yes, the little girl, she says, well, honey, what is it you're trying to draw? Or what is it that you're drawing? And she says, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher says, oh, honey, nobody knows what God looks like. And the little girl just doesn't even glance up from her paper and says, they will in a minute.
Exactly.
But stepping back into that direct puzzle metaphor, something you said, I saw a puzzle at one time that had no, it was just the pieces. There was no picture, right? And in many ways, to me, if you can envision a puzzle box typically that has the picture of whatever it is that you're going to put together, and typically we set that up beside it standing toward us or something, and we're kind of trying to figure out where the blues and the greens and the browns and whatever to get some idea, and we look for the edges first so we have some boundaries to work within. And when you and I are talking, and through the last, it's been, 15 years or something like that we've actually known each other and started assembling puzzles, or however we want to say it, or working on one collectively. We have, we're starting off with a picture again and taking a look at it, and you sitting across from me, if it's actually facing toward me, you're trying to assemble it or help me assemble a picture of a puzzle in this case. But you're looking at it from a totally different perspective. It's the same picture, but you have to look at it, so to speak, upside down. And a lot of times that's really beneficial, as you know, if you've assembled puzzles, that you just get a different perspective by standing at a different place at the table. And again, you're communally working together to assemble this picture. And let's assume for a second that the puzzle we have that is, colored, isn't at all what the picture is on the box. And I think that, again, to add a metaphor on top of metaphor, and there's probably a word that Shakespeare would know for that, but I don't. We've been given a puzzle, born into a puzzle, and a picture was handed us and a story that went along with it. And as we're assembling this puzzle, and even though we can match the blues and greens and the pieces of blue and the reds and the whatever, the picture that emerged for you and I and many others is not even close to what's on that box. It doesn't even remotely reflect what's on that box at all. And I think that has been part of our journey as we start assembling this puzzle throughout the course of our lives, and maybe from a very early age, we notice something isn't right, but we don't have a point of reference around us. We don't have advisors or parents or whoever they may be in our world that says, well, that is not what you're going to be assembling at all. I found out long ago that picture on the box, you're sold a bill of goods. I mean, you bought the
you bought the narrative,
puzzle.
you bought the story.
Yeah, and I think each of us come into that puzzle or whatever, which of course is two-dimensional, and we talked about that, and I don't know if that'll go anywhere, but it just doesn't add up, right? We keep assembling it, we keep putting pieces together, we keep making progress. At the same time, this thing is emerging, and this is just not adding up. I think all of us that, as you know, you've talked to many people, many more than me, I'm sure, we bump up against it eventually, whatever it is, and it just doesn't make sense. And the longer we go, we typically get in a bind somewhere, we reach into that box where the pieces are, or if they're all piled up in the center or wherever we've got them, and it's just like this, nothing is making sense. And eventually we bump into someone else. In my case, it might be you or Kyle or others that we bumped into, or when you took the march to Washington, and it's like, no way, this is this is not that boat that's supposed to be on the water in this puzzle box, the top of the puzzle box. This is not it. I'm putting together a jet airliner or something. I don't know what the hell it is yet, but it isn't that.
Yeah. Well, here's when you say the box, to me, the box represents a script. In other words, it's already laid out and it's already determined. So again, right. If I go to the store and I buy a puzzle, on the outside, I know what I'm buying supposedly by the picture of the completed puzzle on the box itself. That would represent a script, meaning that it's predetermined. So yes. When we're born, and I'm talking about B-O-R-N-E, when we come out of the womb, we're handed the box. The box is the script, but that script would be a birth certificated position in a particular society. Now, the sad part about that particular script, it becomes the mindset. It becomes the box that we fit ourselves into. That's why when somebody says think outside the box, they mean literally outside the script. And here's right. What's interesting about this script. A script is fate. It's predetermined. It means it's going to happen. We already know the outcome if we follow the script, because the author of that particular script has already determined the outcome of all characters right. within the script. So if right. we choose to put that puzzle together, if we follow the script, we already know the outcome. If that script happens to be scripture, which most people might recognize as the word Bible or whatever, then we already know the outcome. The outcome is what? It's Revelation. Revelation's the end of the world, and the end of the world has all these trials and tribulations, and then something else happens that is not known. It is not known, which means it's outside of fate. Now, here's the beautiful thing about getting outside that script or outside that box. You finally make it back to reality or nature. Nature's outside that script. And nature is an unknown quantity. There are no guarantees in nature, where inside the box, inside that protective cover, there are guarantees. In other words, I don't work, I can draw money from the welfare state. Well, guess what? In nature, there's no such thing as a welfare state. So it's sink or swim in nature. So what I'm getting at is that when they hand you that birth certificated script, then in order to get those guarantees, those insurable positions, or that insured character, you have to pay the price or pay the premium for that character. In other words, you have to give something up. And that's what many of us are waking up to, is that the price to participate in that script is too high. The cost is too high. And that's where we're at today. I mean, I believe that this manufactured pandemic, and I mean PAN, as in pan, the mythological Pan,
right.
The price is too high. In other words, the script is so ridiculous at this point. You know, a non-existent biological threat. I mean, nobody's dying anywhere in the world. This thing doesn't exist as far as what they're calling it, and yet they're willing to damage people with a genetic modifier. But that's for a different day. What I'm getting at is the script itself is the box. We're handed a box, a puzzle that then we are trying to put together, but in fact, it's the wrong puzzle for each and every one of us. It's a puzzle for a collective mindset, a script-based mindset. Anyway.
Right. Well, what popped in my head was two things. One was a joke from an early age where when you mentioned Peter Pan or whatever, I don't remember the exact joke, but anyhow, punchline was, well, if somebody hits your Peter with a pan too, you'd fly too. Somebody hits your Peter with a pan, you'd fly too. But yeah, this. I like how you define things very clearly. At the same time, if the vast majority of the collective is still trying to, go along with putting their puzzle together, and it's got to match that box, and they will create, even though the picture in the end may come out to be, like I say, a jumbo jet or something that started out as a boat on the water with sails, they'll tell themselves that picture, even as it's emerging and you're seeing wings develop and stuff like that on this plane, that is actually a sailboat. They're able to do the mental gymnastics it takes to go, no, that's definitely a boat, even though clearly if you look at it, it's a jumbo jet. And that's where the disconnect, I think, between any of us that have kind of bumped into those edges of the envelope of what's been laid out before us, we realize, wait a minute, this does not match that at all. And it makes me think about within the framework of for example, the constitutional framework here and stuff. I don't remember exactly where it is within it, but everything is derived, which makes some kind of logical sense. Everything is derived from the consent of the governed. Well, if you're a rational, reasoning individual, you would never sign up for something like this. And I know you have never been asked, nor have I, nor has anyone else that I know of, maybe an immigrant that's come here and whatever they're reading or something and filling out for paperwork. There's something to that consenting to be governed. And as you and I can probably well attest, we've never asked for any type of governance whatsoever. I mean, yeah, if we show up somewhere, you come to my house, there's some basic rules or something like that of, well, in my home we don't wear shoes in the house or something like that, and it's agreed upon, and so you consent to it or not.
Well, if you don't consent to it, you don't come in.
Right.
If you don't take off your shoes, you're not allowed in my house, so to speak.
We did not literally get any type of opportunity to say, yeah, I'll get on this ship. We were born into what we know to be United States, America, whatever. We can go into that at some other time, and there's enough time today. But we didn't. I mean, that was where early on I bumped into the absurdity of when I was 18, there was still the draft, for example, and you had to sign up for it. And discussing with my parents or whatever, I'm like, that's ludicrous. I'm not interested. Why would I go somewhere to do something to someone that I don't even know, that's never done anything to me as far as I know. I understand if somebody encroached upon me to deal with the situation, but this just doesn't add up. And this is that innocence of youth, I suppose. And it just kind of unfurled from there the same way that I was never invested in any political spectrum, because to me, I viewed our country, as I saw it at that time, well, we hired somebody basically to deal with whatever situation is the president in this case. And so why wouldn't you just send our president over to wherever to beat up their president or something? This is ridiculous. What's the rest of us involved in this for? And it rapidly unfolded into, this is all bullshit to me. This is just beyond ridiculous that I would have anything to do with anything. All I'm going to do is create my life, literally. And most people, as you know, not including yourself, view this world or whatever that we live on, the blue ball that's floating around out there in space, as a place to go play, explore, and create. I know that the vast majority of people that I have encountered in my life, it's tell me what to do. Give me something. Give me that picture that I'm supposed to follow. Give me the directives. And that was never me. And I know it's never been you, even though, yeah, we have fell into cracks and crevices and stuff like that and motored along. But if it didn't make sense, eventually it emerged that this, again, doesn't add up. This is just, it's not making sense.
Again, because our talks are sort of within that framework, new word order. 3 words popped up in my head as you were expounding on that idea. One was Constitution. Now, for a living being, my Constitution's not a 1789 piece of paper. My Constitution is that, by the way, the word to that of which I am constituted. I am constituted. The man sitting on this porch in the sunlight today is made up of mind, body, and spirit. At no point am I made up of paper or wood like Pinocchio. I am mind, body, and spirit. That's my Constitution. So anybody that claims the word Constitution as my Constitution and they're referring to a 1789 document, they have already abandoned their sovereignty. They've already abandoned it. I'm talking about their living biological sovereignty. They have abdicated the throne or their lord and mastery over themselves. They are no longer self-governing. Done. So again, my Constitution's mind, body, and spirit, whereas when people talk about we, by the way, when somebody says we, I already remove myself from that collective. Nobody speaks for me, ever. So we, I'm already out of the we. So that's Constitution. The other word that you picked, that I picked, or 2 more words that I picked up on that was consent. Consent to the governed. First of all, there is a doctrine called the emergency doctrine. And the emergency doctrine is this, is that when there's nobody else there to direct if I find myself in an emergency situation where I need medical help or medical care, if I'm unable to mentally direct that care, then consent is implied. So what they're saying is that when there's an emergency, I, myself, have already lost the ability to control the situation, and consent is implied. So if the word emergency comes into play, consent is implied. So you can see where if there's a war or an emergency going on, any time the word emergency is used, consent's implied. So again, consent to the governed is off the table. Consent is implied through emergency. The third one is when you were talking about the draft. Well, the draft automatically assumes you will go fight.
Yes.
I am a pacifist, meaning that acts of violence are contrary to my conscience, meaning that any act of violence, it doesn't matter what it is, just by the definition of violence. I go with that, the definition of violence. But any violent act itself, I cannot agree to. So as a pacifist, all of those situations that come up between peoples, I don't agree with, because first of all, I don't have any enemies on planet Earth. I myself have no enemies. I know that sounds funny because I don't. People don't understand what that means. You know, I could go to France, I could go to China, I could go anywhere, and if I meet another man on the street, he's not my enemy. Governments have enemies. Governments have other governments. Not my government. I get along with everybody. But governments have enemies, and they're contrived enemies for commerce purposes only. There's no other reason other than territorial commerce. And again, the state itself is, when they separate state and church, they have separated basically head from body, capital from labor. My state of mind is my government, and my body is my labor. You can't separate those two positions. If you try to separate church and state, you basically decapitated the man. And that's what they've ultimately done when the cry for separation of church and state became a physical thing. Then it actually happened. It legally happened in 1954 with the Convention on Statelessness. That's when separation of church and state became a real thing on paper. But it's actually the Convention on Statelessness. And then that's when everybody, and I mean everybody became stateless. And that was intentional as well. So anyway, again, those three things popped out for me right off the bat. Sorry to go so long.
Oh, no, keep going. And I enjoy it. It clears my head, gets me going. And I think
should probably say that you're 2 hours behind me, aren't you, Chuck?
Yeah.
I mean, we're actually, that's not true. We're both in the exact same moment.
Yeah, well.
But on the artificial time construct, you're 2 hours behind. But the sun does rise 2 hours, realistically, even substantially. It doesn't get light but 2 hours after it gets light where I'm located in or near the fictional Northern Illinois. And finally, let's just be clear about what our talks are about. Realistically, the concept of New Word Order is a play on words, but I think the easiest way to describe my mind, the way my mind works, is that, and we can expound on this at another time, but which actually is an impossibility too, because there is no other time other than the present. So even when we talk again, it'll be the present. It can get difficult, but I think the simplest way for me to explain the way I think is, the other day I had somebody, and you and I have already talked about this, but I had somebody on a Facebook post try to convince others with his post that gravity is a theory. He actually said gravity is a theory and went on to explain why it's a theory. And my response to that was, no, gravity is not a theory. Gravity is a word.
Right.
And again, I don't fall off the building and hit the ground and die because of a word, gravity. Something else is occurring. Something else is happening. Right. So words don't kill us. Gravity, the fall, all of that stuff, even the word fall is an action where you can almost envision a body falling. The fact is even the word fall is a word. So no words can kill you. The problem is in the fictional realm, the XY axis, paper world, flat earth, flat realm, words do kill. Pick up any book where somebody's been murdered in the book and somebody's dead on the page. Nobody died in real life, but on the page somebody died. That's what we're looking at. one last thing that, and again, I only like to mention these things to get the brain juices going. Right now, the biggest thing that I'm struggling with is I'm seeing all kinds of shows and documentaries and ideas about what this thing called the Mandela effect, where they're saying that we live in a matrix. We live in a matrix. And there are potential glitches in the matrix. Well, number one, in my world, it's not even a possibility because I know the word matrix. Other people think they know what the word matrix is, but they do not. Matrix is a real thing, but it's actually considered mother or the womb itself. That's the matrix. But from there, a fictitious realm is created through this birth certificated character. That character is always tied to that position. Now, here's the reason it's important. Mandela effect is it allows for the changing of history, the redirection, the changing of direction whenever the programmers of that particular story or narrative want to change it. In reality, they can't control nature, but they can control a narrative. And that's what is the presumed matrix. A biological man does not live in a matrix, doesn't even exist in a matrix, but his mind can place him into that world or those ideas or that narrative, a script, so to speak. And right. If you start buying into the matrix or the Mandela effect, what they're doing is they're actually using a fictitious or fictional idea or narrative to explain a fictional problem. They're both fictions, neither of which is true. So we need to stop buying in to this nonsense and just open our eyes and look around to see what's really happening, because again, the Mandela effect is a fictitious concept that we need to negate right off the bat. It's hard for me to talk to people because they really want their beliefs to be true. Anyways, go ahead.
Yes. Well, yeah. Throughout a lot of the last, dozen years or so, government, which became a cuss word to me, but prior I ignored. Again, back in word origin type stuff, you have two words that are put together, and one of the things I realized was it's a verb. It's not a noun in this case. And most people, you say government, and they're going to think Washington, D.C. and Capitol building and whatever imagery they have in their head for government. But government, the word, is two words combined, like many. And if you know the origins, govern is to control, and ment is mente, from Latin mind. And going off of what you just said, all government does is control perception, right? Which pulls you from what we would know to be reality, nature, the nature of existence. And the power of words, though, language in this case, is their tool. I remember a book I read called The Instant Millionaire, and in the book, this man is in a room at this millionaire's mansion or whatever, and the door is locked and he can't get out, and there's a fax machine or something there, printer, I guess it was. And it spits out this piece of paper, "You are going to die." And of course, this guy just freaks because he's yelling out the window because he can see this old guy down in the garden that's the millionaire he was supposed to come to meet, and he's just flipping out. So one, he is arrested of control of his destiny at that point because the door to the room is locked. He's on the second or third floor. If he jumps, he's going to die, literally. And so he's flipping out, and about the time he can't hack it anymore, the door mysteriously unlocks. And he makes it out, and he goes running downstairs, and he bumps in, to the millionaire or whatever, and he's just livid. And It was a life lesson in this book, which was a really good book at the time I read it, and I've shared it many times. But the long and the short of it is, the millionaire says, "What are you upset about?" And he says, "Because I got this piece of paper in my room and I couldn't get out, and it says you're going to die." And the millionaire says, "Why would you assume, where did you get that or whatever? That's just a statement of fact. It didn't say I'm going to kill you. It says you are going to die, which is just a statement of fact. In other words, eventually you're not going to be here. But your mind took that and went somewhere with it." And in many ways I've looked at that through the years, and since I read it 20 years ago or something like that, and it's like, this is the game that's going on. I'm going back to tie in, hopefully, to a new word order. We have used this, and I think maybe you get the credit for coming up with the two-dimensional world that controls the three-dimensional reality by our unknowing, right? We just go along with, and we never consented to things, and we're just bumping along, living our lives, whatever the case may be. Yet somewhere along the line, it's like, this doesn't add up. We know that legalese, for example, which is, I guess, is a recognized language globally, that we were never taught this as well, using the same words here, at least in North America, English, but the meanings are totally different depending if it's being used by the Law Society or by you and I. And you don't bump into this until you get into courts or interacting with their commerce system somehow, and you realize, hopefully, something's really desperately wrong here. Something is not adding up again. Doesn't make sense. Well, for me, that obviously, if you're giving me this language to use or teaching me that, and I learned that an apple is that red or green thing off a tree and so on and so forth, yet that isn't how you use that word, that I'm eventually in desperate situations where I'm doing my best using these words, and I'm not getting out of the situation that I'm in. In fact, it's getting worse. And my only recourse is to, if I do get clear of the system, to avoid that system completely. And I think all of us have probably ran into that much as any, that shook us loose and said, this is all bullshit. This is complete and utter nonsense. And you've delved into the depths of, I'll say, our origin story to some degree, and I'm not referencing Darwin, God, or anything else, and that we have been living in this story. You used J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter as many times metaphor and analogy, that this was an author that created a story, actually really good stories. I enjoyed reading the Harry Potter series long ago with my daughter. But that's it in a nutshell to me. And she's the author of it. She doesn't deny or hide that she is, and most people, I guess, see it as a story, although I don't know anymore if that's true. But for whatever reason, you, I, and however many others there are, realize that she's the author of that. I don't have any rights over that. I'm just reading something that this person created. And you very eloquently used that many times to illustrate my story is my story, your story is your story. Yet somehow we do not have those rights. I hate that word. I absolutely hate it. But nonetheless, I have no other word to put in its place. We are the authors of our story. And until, like we were talking the other day and you brought up, until we are no longer here, meaning where life force is passed from us or whatever, that's when it becomes history.
His story, yes. It becomes his story.
Yeah, and
third person, third party, past tense.
Right, and we have not lived. Many people have not lived in their story, and that they authored and claimed it. We're living in that somebody else's story that's been created, just like the box and the picture on it, and that's what's going to emerge when you assemble this puzzle. It's a mind fuck, for sure. And from what I can tell, much as there's stuff made manifest in this reality, structures and so on and so forth, all of the stuff that's actually going on, it doesn't even exist other than in our mind. And that's been put there, period.
Well, let me expound on that real quick, because
sure.
So you and I get together one night and we decide to go see a movie. Physically, I come and pick you up in my car. We go out to the movie theater. We sit down in our chair. Physically, we are there. You're sitting right next to me in the movie theater. Physically, mind, body, and spirit, right next to my mind, body, and spirit. Chuck is next to Kurt. Physically. The moment the movie starts, if it's good enough, it will draw our mind into that narrative or that story. Physically, we're still sitting in the same time-space continuum right next to each other. But mentally, we are now putting ourselves, in other words, we've abdicated the throne of the biological being and gone into the world of that particular writer or author for the moment, for the time being. Let me say that again, for the time being. So now we are in this theater and mentally participating or buying into, because we literally bought a ticket to see it, we're buying into the story on that two-dimensional screen. That is no different than us buying into the birth certificate, the two-dimensional XY axis piece of paper birth certificated character. When I wake up in the morning believing that I'm the birth certificated character, the two-dimensional XY axis piece of paper character, I put on the clothing of that character every morning in my mind, government. My mind is now taking in that character. I put on the clothing of that character, go outside or go to my job in that character. What people don't understand is that as long as I'm wearing the clothing of that character, the author, the authority of that character is the creator of that character, which is not me. So, again, as long as I'm wearing the clothing of Harry Potter, all of my product belongs to the creator of Harry Potter, which happens to be J.K. Rowling. The same holds true with if I put on the clothing of the birth certificated person and go to work, all of my product belongs to the creator of that character, which is why nobody owns anything anymore, because they're all wearing the clothing of a character born, B-O-R-N-E, to another world, a flat XY axis world. As long as, now this is the best part about the whole idea of our power. As the author of my story, i.e. the mystery, as the author of the mystery itself, I have all the power and authority over all the things that I create. But if I defer to a different author, I should say, then all of my power and authority goes or is redirected into that situation. I want you to picture something, Chuck. You're standing over a table, and on that table is the original paperwork that the hospital generated upon your arrival to this new world outside the womb. Okay, and we're going to call it a birth record. That birth record is a piece of paper. It's an XY axis. It is a flat land, literally a flat land. But as you stand over it in three-dimensional, filled with the Spirit of God, I'm going to call it inspired by the breath. The breath and inspiration are one and the same thing, and inspire is nothing more than the Spirit-filled living being which you are. Again, without that Spirit, can you stand upright? No. Without being inspired, your body falls to the ground in a dead heap. My point is that you're looking down, filled with the Spirit. You're a living being in the present moment, looking at this piece of paper, looking down at it. looking down at it, from above, looking down at this piece of paper. Here's the thing. They found a way, and I don't use this term lightly, but they found a way to chain God to their piece of paper, and they did it through our belief in the paper.
Yes.
They've chained my spirit. They've bonded my spirit to their two-dimensional piece of paper. So as long as I believe that paper and I are one and the same thing, my spirit and energy goes into that character, their character, I may add, and I disappear from reality. I no longer exist the moment I go into his story because I'm no longer present.
Yeah. Well, that coincides with intellectual property, right, where they have stolen it essentially right out of the gate. Whatever that you create through your intellect is theirs, because you're operating in their story and not your story. We've seen this time and again capturing.
Right out of the gate. Right out of the gate, known as the threshold, known as the vagina, known as the womb itself. Right out of the gate.
Right, and in so doing, the creativity and the emotion it requires whenever you get excited about a thought that you've had, and you're going to, whatever it is, make manifest somehow the experience or the object or whatever. In effect, what they've done in doing so is disable agency to act. Now, you may have the thought, but it doesn't fit the picture, right, that's on the box. And all along you're trying to assemble your own picture again, and you will tell yourself, even though it comes up as the airliner instead of the boat, that is actually a boat, because it's the only way it'll fit, because they've snatched reason from you, as we know through compulsory education systems, and whatever creativity that most individuals, I would say, at one point had, I can't say anymore because things have been so perverted through shots that were given that we don't need, to whatever the environment has imposed upon us. Now, this is how you act. I remember distinctly something that stuck with me all these years, and I'd got a new bike, and I'd paid for it, the very first one that I'd ever paid for anyways. I'm out screwing around on the bike in front of the house and kind of showing off, of course, and my parents happened to be out there, whatever, and I don't remember if there's one or both said something, because when what I was doing, I was going to fall over, right, or whatever was going to happen, or hit a tree or etc. I just remember distinctly one or both of them saying, "Don't try yourself." And it hit, and it struck. And I was probably, 10, 12 years old. I don't recall. I used my lawn mowing money or paper route money to buy it, and that stayed with me. And it's like they're attempting to remove agency. Now, this is much later on that I've put this together, but they're attempting to remove agency from me. In other words, steal from me an experience, because if I'm screwing around and not using the bike in a way that's going to keep me on the seat and safe from crashing and burning, they're stealing from me the experience of learning that if I get too far on one side of the bike, it's going to tip over, and learning that intimately. And that, again, goes back to, this was done right out of the womb, out of the gate, out of mom, born into this new world. And we're handed immediately the words, and we're handed immediately these guidelines, and depending on our parents and whether or not they allow us to develop into who we can be potentially, or if they're going to curtail that. And the vast majority of us had things imposed upon us that didn't expand us, but more so closed us down to opening up continually to, as this whole new world for us starts to broaden, keep us reined in somehow. So for whatever strange reason, those of us that it didn't really stick so much that we continued to go ahead, fuck it, we'll ride our bike this way, and if we fall off, we fall off. The majority said, no, Mom told me that was going to happen, and so I'm not even going to go there. And we end up with a population, as we know globally, it appears, that have very little experience, going back to relevance and what most people talk about. They may be very intellectual in some ways, but what they're discussing is things that's been handed to them. They don't explore, be it mentally or otherwise, a lot of times, the world that you get to create so that you can have experiences, that you can develop and retain what would eventually become, hopefully, knowledge and then wisdom, using those terms as hopefully we know them to be. We don't have anything like that to navigate, and I suppose it's part of the tribal aspect of us, and that if we're outside the group, we're going to die. Well, in this case, you and I found if we're inside the group, there's a good chance you're dying, and outside the group is probably the only place that you're actually going to, quote, live. You may be alive in the group, but you're not living. You're not exploring the vast reaches of whatever it is that you're going to create. Maybe something that someone else has created that you get to experience with them. It's like, wow, that's really cool. That's interesting. We have seen such a degradation of, I'm going to say, biologically innate abilities, starting with just, like I say, the ability to go out and interpret what it is that we're experiencing or creating on our own, and assembling our own puzzle, our own picture, bites and pieces at a time, because we're told, no, that doesn't. It's a little girl that's writing or drawing a picture of God, right? And nobody knows what God looks like. Well, they will in a minute.
I love that.
Our world is that, in my opinion, meaning my life experience, my life in general, is to go out and create my own image of God, not a copyrighted version, which is in all the Bibles, which is, you're the first one to ever say it. Maybe you run into that, or maybe it come out of you some way, recognition-wise, that open a Bible. It's copyrighted. And I think you said it. Who the fuck copyrights God? Well, this has all been copyrighted,
as
we well know.
No, what they did is they created a version that then we bond God to. So they copyright or patent or whatever. They have trade secrets based upon this birth certificated person, and then we chain God to their character. So, yeah, indirectly they gain control of the Spirit of God by our belief or agreement indirectly to their character. I should probably say also that I too had an experience on a bicycle, but it was actually through my son. I remember my wife at the time was my son was learning to ride a bike, and when she put all this gear on, all these pads, and you know what I mean, to save him from the fall. What's amazing is that he was so geared up with helmet and knee pads and elbow pads and all this garbage that he only could think of falling, because that's what the gear was for.
Right.
All of that protective gear was for the fall, and so he couldn't learn to ride the bike with the gear on, because he knew he was going to fall. He knew it. That was the intent of the gear. So, and I looked at her and I said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Take all that shit off." And the moment he took it off, he could ride.
Right.
The moment he took off all the protective gear, he could ride, because the absolute "you're going to fall" was removed along with the protective gear, guaranteeing a fall. And
Right.
he fell, I mean, at some point. But, I mean, the point is that it was the protective gear that instilled the fear, and he couldn't ride. That's where we're at today. I mean, they're using fear to freeze everybody into a position
Right.
that then they can actually offer up whatever antidote to the problem. But yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I mean, we all have. By the way, you used the word wisdom too. Just remember that mythologically or the word Sophia, or the female name Sophia, is wisdom. So when you see that in movies, they're always implying wisdom. Listen to this woman, Sophia.
Yeah, well, it's that exactly that restriction of movement, that can be mental movement or physical movement, to go and, as the old adage is, you don't ever learn anything if you do it right. You only learn if you do it, quote, wrong. You make a mistake. Mistake, obviously, is a bad thing in a lot of people's minds. No. The only way I've ever learned anything is that I'm willing to risk whatever it may be, and then I got to figure it out. And guess what? It sticks at that point. And I start assembling my own picture. I'm not going by what somebody else told me. It's like, no, let me fall off the bike. I'm good. I'll risk. But you put the pads and stuff on me, all of a sudden I can't even move. I can't do anything at that point.
The insured character, the born alive insured character, the birth certificated person is an insured character. Remember that acts of God are not insurable. So if you are a product of nature, an act of God, then you're not insurable. But their certificated character is insurable, and that obviously is the fictitious realm. The neat thing about the fictitious realm, which I'm just using that word lightly, is that it's finite. It is restricted. It's restricted by the policy itself, the public policy itself. And as long as you're okay with being agoraphobic, in other words,
right.
If you're willing to stay inside that box forever, and again, the term would be agoraphobic, you're afraid to go outside where nature could get you, then you will suffer the consequences of that fictional realm. And that's I think what we're feeling today with the artifice of COVID, or the novel coronavirus. And I'm saying novel enough times where I hope people pick up the concept of novel.
Right.
How do you want to end this? Let's end this thing today, because do you want to do this again?
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
This
what do we do?
This was definitely. It's going to take a little bit to, I think, smooth out the edges, and as you and I have always done, there's no script when we walk up on. I had no idea what the fuck we're going to talk about at all. I just know shit's going to start unfolding, and who the fuck knows, and I always take away something from it, not the least of which is, wow, my head actually works a little better now. Yeah, we're living in artifice and subterfuge, where it takes this to keep, at least for some of us, I think, our abilities to think, reason, assimilate experiences, enact our own agency, and continue to, it's kind of like if you think of a tomato plant and they put a cover over it and it's in its little pot, it can only grow to the limits of that clear plastic. But you take it off and that thing can, it can blossom into this giant bush that's 3 feet tall. I think we're always removing that, or you and I at least are always removing that for one another in a lot of ways, because as much as we may think that we're expanding at all times, I'm no good without you and you're no good without me. We got to have that mirror. We've got to have something that pushes us outside and expands upon our own thoughts a bit, so that we continue to assemble our own puzzle.
I'm going to let my last words for the day between you and I will be, and then I'm going to let you have the last word, just so you know. But number one, I hope that, you and I both agree to make this private conversation accessible to others, correct?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, now
Yep.
here's what I really wanted to say. I just wanted to make sure people understood that you and I are in agreement. We have a literal meeting of the minds on this conversation and future conversations. Here's the thing. I know something that I see things in a different way, obviously, than most people, but in 1913, the year the bankers created the Federal Reserve System, in 1913, something else was created that nobody ever speaks about, and it's called actors' equity. You can Google actors' equity, and it'll pop up, and it'll start to explain what actors' equity is. But I think those two words alone should speak volumes. Actors' equity, which means a share in the story, a share in the script. Does that seem right to you?
Yes.
Yeah, a return. In other words, a share in this story. But what's interesting is that actors' equity came the same year to the soil of the United States of America as the Federal Reserve, the Reserve, which is the equitable position, which is interesting, again, and the Federal Reserve was based upon a piece of paper.
Yes.
So again, actors' equity by playing the character or the role, like Obama said, we all have our roles to play. That's actors' equity. You can only become whole in their world by putting on the vestment or the character that is offered to you. And that's actors' equity. By the way, if you go to actors' equity today on Wikipedia, they talk about an awful lot of things related to COVID, which is an interesting, why in the world are they so concerned about COVID and what COVID is doing to their actors? Anyway, you go ahead and have the last word.
Well, as we sign off of most of our conversations through the years, and it's somewhat unfortunate that we haven't done a face-to-face in a long time, but I have nothing but respect and appreciation for all of the background work and investigation that you do ongoingly, more so than anyone else that I know. It is truly, an anchor for me in a world that is so completely off the rails that I rarely have my feet on what would be the proverbial ground. I'm swimming in a sea of I don't even know, and I'm not the only one, of course. You as well can probably attest to this. But no, just a great appreciation for you willing to share your time, not only with me, but with others. And hopefully there's some benefit you derive from it always. In my own world, whatever that means, it's invaluable. And maybe this is going to help touch other people's lives, and maybe it eventually comes into anyone that's listening, because we're all over the place, that they at least can step in a little bit, and maybe they have some questions for us or something, and we can ponder them or throw out whatever the case may be, something that's beneficial for them.
Well, I love you too. On that note, thank you, Chuck. We'll do this again real soon, okay?
Yeah, we'll just stay in touch and see what works for us both to get together. Do you get an actual file that you could send so I have a copy of this?
Yes. I'll send it to you.
Perfect. Hey,
All right.
Give
man.
Debbie a hug
We'll talk.
and take care of yourself. Thanks.
All right. We'll talk later. Okay. Bye.
Bye.